Hi, welcome to this Open Security Summit session in January 2024. And we're really going to hit a really nice big one, very topical in 2024, at least, which is how do you limit hallucinations of all these chatbots and GPTs and LLMs and foundation models that we're starting to put everywhere. So Matthew, over to you. Really looking forward to this session.
Excellent. Thanks. Yeah, it's very topical. I'm very excited to have the opportunity to share what I've found out and also get some validation around it and feedback as well. There's a lot to cover, and some of it is intuitive at the moment. So I'm going to crack on a little bit there. So I've gone for the subtitle of "Context is all you need." There's a little wink to the papers that are out there. I wanted to set the context of what I'm achieving by going with the end first. So these are the key points, and I'm sharing this now so that the rest of the presentation, the messages through it, can be related back to this overview, because they're the most important things. And also, as we were saying just before the recording started, the future is going to change quite quickly, and my gut goes towards knowledge graphs and how we use discrete and continuous data by putting them in the context of the LLM prompts. So yeah, context is all you need. Hopefully by the end you'll see why this is here, why I'm saying that. You don't want to treat the LLM as a database. It's not by definition. It's a group of probabilities stored in various matrices of weights and biases. It's not a database, but it is exceptionally good at understanding language. It will follow our lead, so we can use techniques, chain of thought, step back, zero shot, fuse shot. All of these techniques we can use to direct the LLM. I think for me, this is the most important part. We can use tools to insert the data that is relevant and the LLM can use. And that's how you predominantly limit hallucinations, in my view, from the work that I've done. I first did this presentation about 7 months ago, before the summer. And at the time, it was mainly about the prompts that you can use with ChatGPT, setting the GPT model to zero, temperature to zero, sorry, as an example. And that was a very good way of ensuring that you were controlling and leading the LLM correctly.
Matthew, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I still am, I would say, debating, right, in my head is like how deep you go with the customization, right? So when I kind of went on this journey, I thought that it was the models that we had to customize, right? Like and for that, I always have that instinct to going, bloody hell, once you start customizing the models, right? Like how do you even control it, right? It's a bit like how do you do erasures in a module? How do you delete stuff from a model, right? It's like, whoa, right? But then the more I got into it, the more I got into the whole, okay, cool. So we can move a lot into the prompts. And then I kind of got into the, vector stores, etc. But I like the fact that it says not vector stores. I kind of think that more and more is about having those very, very good laser sharp prompts with very good data feeds that we control and almost remove as much black magic from the system as we can, and even having multiple models in play. So you don't want to almost customize models. You almost want models that we can understand more ins and outs, right? What's your views on that?
100% agree. In my mind, and what I'm hoping to get to a point in the coming months, I should say, my engineering hat, I'll probably say weeks, but it'll take a little bit longer, is to get the Phi 2 model run locally and implemented with the architecture I'll show you in a little bit in the slideshow. And because for me, the two bits of value, strongly interlinked with large language model is that it understands language, and as a result can reason in a way that a human understands. I've never seen it really as a data store, because my immediate reaction is, well, I don't want my private data in an LLM, so that's never going to work. And so I started looking at Llama Index and LangChain, Llama Index versus latterly LangChain, a year ago. Because for me it was always about getting the data into the prompt and then using the reasoning capabilities and the linguistic understanding that comes with an LLM.
Yeah, I love that concept. What you're saying is that don't use an LLM as a data store, right? That is
Yeah,
so interesting. Even maybe we want to get to a point where we want to take knowledge out of it so we can
yeah,
feed it knowledge, right? Let's say in security, we say, actually, although it could know about ISO, it could know about GDPR, actually, I want a model that doesn't know about that so that I can feed it actually what I care about GDPR or even the whole GDPR standard. So we control that part
yeah,
there, right? So we don't get knowledge from the LLM. What we get is language, like I said, understanding and reasoning and a bit of logic to
yeah,
apply the rules of what we define, right?
yeah. I strongly recommend, and I can't pronounce his surname unfortunately. Stefan Bilbeck, I think it is, and I don't know why I put a Germany type accent on that, because he's definitely French. He's the Microsoft lead. He's the guy whose textbooks is all you need, I think was his view. And he's at least the video I saw about a week ago, when they introduced Phi 2, was his view is what is the minimum sized LLM you can get that portrays high level reasoning. And in
Yeah,
my mind, that's where we want to get to, because then there's no data concerns about the LLM. It's purely a reasoning engine. And then you ask it what data it needs to fulfill a request. So the data is passed in like an application layer on a n-tier stack, 3-tier stack, and it's always transient. And you can then also, you've got your data segmentation, private data can go in and out, and it's not stored by the LLM.
yeah.
Very
No,
exciting.
I agree. Cool, man. Let's keep going, right?
Yeah,
Oh,
cool.
knowledge graph, man. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So on that note as well, talking about that interchange of data, I think the world, quite understandably, is looking at vector stores, and because they're sort of, I mean, they're awesome for a start. Like finding your nearest neighbor using cosine and that sort of thing is very, very helpful. But that's more on large amounts of unstructured data. I think the majority
Yeah.
of security professionals will be working with large amounts of structured data.
Yeah.
And they'll also be working with systems that have APIs already on them.
Yeah.
So then the question for me becomes, using tools to enrich the context is about how do you get an LLM to use your API? So that's pretty much what this is about. Just for reference, this
Oh,
was
come on. Worldly maps and Knevin, man. There we go.
a little bit about me. I wasn't sure sort of where to sort of pitch it at a little bit. This is, if people don't know me or anything like that, first time I've done this. I'm not going to go through the details other than say I'm a maths, automation, security nerd. I'm massively excited and curious about this area, but also feel that it has to be done responsibly. You don't, I mean, I don't want to get too dramatic or anything like that, but I feel as a security person that understands the maths and loves automation and working with this side of things, we've got a great opportunity to do this responsibly, actually, and to start to look at it and go, hey guys, let's have a chat with the product owners straight away, because in my view, actually, our interests are aligned between security people and product owners. The Wardley chart, is that what you get? I've just realized that's what you liked, isn't it?
Of course, man. And the Knevin framework, right? Because
Yeah,
that's a lot of people don't think about that, but I feel it's also another one of those frameworks, right? That
yeah,
is insane. Right? Like, and I have to say, I really say that the only thing, probably Knevin framework was close there. The only thing in the last 10 years that I really found interesting is Worldly Maps and LLMs. Is the only thing that I had to say that is not a variation of what we've done before. It's not that it's not good stuff. There's always is, right? But if I think about the things I've learned, I'm going, now that is really freaking cool, right? And like worldly maps is like it changed how I think about things, right? And again, the Cynefin framework again, although I found the worldly maps more useful, more practical in the way I think about it. But I feel that what I think is exciting is that I could never see how we could scale the worldly maps in the Cynefin framework, and now I see how we can, because now we can
With
start to
LLMs.
apply it. Yes, think about it. The LLMs allows us to have those
Yeah,
conversations, allows us to create those stories, right?
Yeah.
So allows us to scale this, and scale that knowledge in a way that we can never before.
Yeah, definitely. I hadn't thought about that. I can see it now. I understand why you think that about Wardley maps as well. Like, it's this particular one that spoke to me. I've looked at the others and I've thought, oh, that looks really cool, but I've never used it. And then when I saw this one, I was like, this is this explorer, villager, and town planner, because I've been all across those. And
Yeah.
the other reason the I can't pronounce it very well though,
Cynefin with a
Cynefin.
is Welsh, but think of it a K. I know.
Yeah,
Cynefin.
Cynefin. Yeah. For me, a friend introduced it, or a colleague introduced me to it about 4 years ago, and I was like, oh my God, I've been trying to apply the complicated rationale to decision-making process to chaotic and complex areas.
Yeah.
And it caused me, I was trying to do things in a structured way, in an environment that was still complex. And when I realized that, my relaxation levels went down about 1,000,000-fold. I was like, right, we can't apply that there, or you can try, but this is a better approach. And actually, for the chaotic area, using it for LLMs at the start a year ago, something that I spoke to the exco and that about, saying this is a good approach to take. It's an option that you've got to figure out what to do with this technology. Because like you, LLMs, I don't think I've seen a bigger technology step.
Yeah. And by the way, like the same way that you on your complicated and chaotic, and I agree. I like your description of stress levels, because I feel it's the same thing. I feel that once I understood the explorers, villagers, town planners, once I understood that model and I started to apply, not only I could explain why most things don't work well, I could also explain why it works. And I could also explain, for example, where I operate very well, where I don't operate very well, and how teams are structured, but also how teams are structured for failure almost from the start. Because you get an explorer team doing town planning stuff, and you get a town planning team doing explorer stuff, and it's almost like they all brilliant, but you have to understand the phase. And the other thing that I've learned, which is also and Simon used to say this, and I never really understood until I experienced it, is the idea that each tribe almost, right, has to pinch from the other, because naturally they don't almost let go. So it's kind of like you do need the villagers to pinch from the explorers, going, dude, it's okay, like go out there again, like we got this covered. And then it's the town planners going, guys, I know you still think you can organize this, we now need proper structure, right? We need freaking roads and sewage and government and all that stuff, and it's important, right? But I thought there will be more of a smooth transition. Now I really understand it. There is a pinching. I think you can manufacture that a little bit, because strategically you can starve resources a little bit, right? But those lines now, I like you said, really brought my levels down, because I now understand, and also understand what can be done and what can't be done. So it's really insane platforms, right? And
I agree there. And one of the biggest things for me was that it gives me an idea of which I say, okay, so this is the type of role I'm taking on at the moment, and I'm going to take it this far, and then I'm going to stop, and someone might come and nick it in a month.
And that's good,
it might
right?
not be immediately, and you don't always get that smooth handover.
And this also explains why, for example, AWS is kicking out of the park, because AWS is executing this sort of, especially, the ILC pattern, the innovate, leverage, and commoditize, right? They running this like spectacularly. Either and then some of those guys thinking maps, I think, but also I think they just got a great model, which they become really good at that, allowing the innovation to occur. Then the village comes together, and then they town plan it, and then they allow the next explorers to go further, right? So
Yeah,
what's insane is that no more people copy AWS, because the model it works spectacularly, and they are literally doing this. They commoditizing bit by bit by bit. They
yeah,
productizing, and I like this concept that Simon has, where they harvest almost what the villages are doing. It's almost
yeah,
like, think about AWS become a great town planner machine, right? So the AWS, they know that every time they put a town planner, new explorers are going to come in. So they almost let the explorers come in, they feed them, they let them go out, they send the villages, let them villages, and they come along and town plan that, right? And then they do it over and over and over again, starting with compute, then lambdas, then serverless, then databases, then
security
airspace
tools over the
security
last
tools.
3 or 4 years. All
Yeah,
of a sudden,
yeah,
they introduced about 50 security tools, it seemed,
yeah,
and it's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
that's nuts. But yeah, I can see what you're saying in their approach. How it's like, well, let's give people a lot of opportunity to explore, and then we start to see what the villagers pick up, and then the town planners are going to say, oh, we want that service, and
Yeah.
they're going to go, okay, we'll scale that for
Yeah,
the
yeah. And then they arrive. It's almost like they arrive with their toolkit, poof, and then that becomes another city, right? And that's how they keep, going and going and gaining more and more space, right? Cool, man. Now keep going, man. But
Yeah,
you start.
sorry. Yeah, I'm going to, but I just wanted to say one thing. Like the inverse of that, I think GCP is purely a town planner. There's no scope for, at least what I've seen about it, there's very little scope for exploration or
Yeah.
village maintenance. Maybe village maintenance, but yeah.
Well,
I'll
if you're
move
playing
on.
catch up, it's normal, right?
Wait, that true?
If you're playing catch up, you're playing catch up. It's the
Yeah,
difference between being on the point on the tip of the arrow or being behind. If you're not on the tip of the arrow, you're not doing
yeah,
a lot of exploration. You're just trying to catch up until you have the feeling you're at the peer level, and then you might try to out innovate the other or outpace the other. But if you don't have this flywheel effect going for you, it will be very hard to get this extra momentum to actually surpass it. And I know it's fascinating from the strategy point of view. I have yet to find a company I work for that actually has such a clear structure in how they plan their strategy and their innovation. I love Simon Wardley's mumble jumbo strategy generator.
Yeah.
I think that's the most fantastic thing, because it's all a bunch of words that you can get from your top 5 consultancy that basically mean nothing.
yeah,
But
yeah,
Actually, we
they
need
all
to do a
sound
ChatGPT
grandiose.
version of it, man. Somebody needs to
yeah.
do, because
Quite.
that was even done before ChatGPT. Now we can do even a better version. It's called the BLA, isn't it? Business layer abstraction, something like the BLA, right?
We used to
The
get
BLA
bingo
generator.
cards, and you can mark them off when
Yeah.
someone says it.
Yeah, there was
Yeah,
an
but
interesting
just to come back
discussion
to something you said
between.
a moment ago, Louis. I thought that was a really, really good point. And I think, even if you get to peer level, you're only going to get that innovation potentially with a jump like Microsoft have done with LLMs over Google for search. I don't know, the future's going to show whether they do get the search, but I know that I've started to use Bing 50 to 60% of the time now for searches over Google, and I only use Google now really because I default to it because all of my services are there, and I go, oh, why am I not using Bing?
I mean,
And
the Bing GPT agent is fantastic. I must say,
yeah,
before I started paying for GPT, I was using that heavily, and I was impressed by the results. I was telling Dinis just now on the previous session. I have a weekly session with my security champions, and I go through the always top 10, do the normal rounds, and I ask the Bing GPT generator, hey, I'm doing a security champion session. I need a sample of a vulnerable code snippet or function that exhibits OWASP A5.
yeah,
Help me. And it generates for me some whatever, and I can choose the language. And I tell you, I want Python this time. I want Java. And then it generates me whatever, just a Java snippet with a vulnerability. It explains to me the vulnerability, and I tell them then fix it. Show me
Yeah,
this code. And then I can go with my developers, do key tips and funky stuff, and it's just fantastic.
it is. That is really cool. I could. I'm gonna move on because
Move on, man, because this
I
is
would start talking about a software development lifecycle assistant that I started last week. So yeah, just if anybody is watching later, I just wanted to give you some context of the energy that I've felt through GPT, ChatGPT, LLMs, and embeddings. And it is, for me, ChatGPT is amazing, but I wanted to know the bits behind it. You know, ChatGPT is an app for me. You don't get a lot of control. And I wasn't interested in the knowledge aspect that it had. I mean, although it's awesome, I wanted to know how it works and how it does the reasoning. And I've been told you can tell a lot by the first thing that someone ever asked ChatGPT. And mine was I said, ChatGPT, can you explain the mathematics behind how you work? So that was the first thing I ever asked there. And when I found out about embeddings, do you know embeddings? Just it's a way of turning language into a lot of numbers.
Yeah,
The
the vector.
Computer can really start to get the nuance of every particular, slight meaning of a word, like weight and lots of things. So yeah, that was me. But then hallucinations are a thing. At the company I was at the time, lots of people were saying, what can we do about hallucinations? So this presentation started off as a way to communicate within the company about how to manage hallucinations. It did start off mainly with techniques, like just tell it to be honest.
Who came up with that term? I think whoever came up with the term hallucination deserves a prize, because he almost saved half the industry. Because literally, like you said, this computer, the thing is making shit up, right? It's literally lying. But
Exactly.
in a way, when they said hallucinate, he almost like, it's okay. He hallucinates a little bit. You know what I mean? It's almost like that word that almost made the industry. Because
yeah, I'd never thought about it like that, because I spend a lot of my time like a grumpy old man going, it's not hallucinating, it's discombobulated.
yeah.
But yeah, no one like hallucinate just rolls off the tongue, and you go, we'll sort that out later.
Yeah, it's like whoever came up with Copilot at Microsoft, again, deserves a prize, because it's a Copilot, and they like jumped on it to their credit. And I feel like, say, look, this is really like a Copilot, right? But it's not Microsoft Copilot, it's just one of them. But they really nicely hooked on that concept, which is really what it is, right? All of these are like Copilots for you, right?
And because that was one of the big things I spoke a lot about a year ago, was everybody saying, well, it's going to replace me. I'm like, no, it doesn't replace, it just augments a human capability.
Yeah.
It's not, you can't, I mean, look, it hallucinates. you can't trust it to do that. And so we spoke a lot about hallucinations. And for me, there's a lot of rabbit holes with hallucinations. And I think this is where I went slightly down a different avenue. I'm just checking the time. I can't see it.
We good, man. As long as you keep going. This is my favorite topic, right? So
cool, good.
There's no
yeah, I've got no visibility on it at the moment, but yeah, I'll get back to the hallucinations thing. So we spoke a lot about it. I did a presentation with an intern as well, where we looked at things called snowballing, which is where someone did a paper on the probability that a LLM will just build on previous context, because it values the context, like as in the prompt, more than the data within itself. So if at some point it responds with a mild like untruth, should we call it, or not quite factual, and then you validate it in a way by continuing with a response, it starts to snowball. There's a great paper about that came out probably about 10 months ago or something like that. But you know, for me, you can go down a lot of rabbit holes. And the big thing for me, I highlighted there, like personal and private data stays separate to the internals of the LLM. That's always, I'm like, whatever, I'm going to put in my data, and I'm pretty confident because of this concept that the LLMs will focus on the prompt over the internal data, and the fact that you can say, only if you do not know, say do not know. If the data isn't available in the context, say it's not available. It turns that LLM into that language interpretation reasoning engine. And yeah, so I'll try and get as many silly pictures in as I can. And I think there's a bit of a secret. It's not really a secret, but security and product are really aligned. I think, or should be really aligned. I see no reason why they shouldn't be. Because you've got to have faith. Now, there's just a slide to get that in, really, but CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The term in the machine learning industry, that side of things, seems to be faithfulness. So how factual is it? Is it factual? So that was just to give some context and to relate between integrity and availability, which for me means the data is true to the person that's viewing it, and availability means the data is up to date. So it's not saying, hey, you've got 500 euros in your bank account, when what really happens, you had 500 euros 10 days ago, but you've since spent 400. So, and faithfulness, I think, is the machine learning version of that.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I like the term. The only thing I would say, there's a bit of it's a loaded word, right? Faith.
Yeah.
In a way, it's a bit loaded. But to be honest, if you take it to almost what is faith, like you believe in something, I think there's an interesting concept of when you use the LLMs, there's a degree of faith that you need to have, which, but I think that's because it's loaded. For some individuals, that might be great because, their person believes, and for other individuals, might be a real problem, right? So, but I think the word, you have almost a faith that this is going to deliver is actually, a really great concept.
Yeah, and as you'll see, they've got all scientific on it. So this was, this just goes to show that how quick, at least from my point of view, the industry's moving. I took this from a study that Pinecone published on Monday. So this is their study of faithfulness. When you compare RAG to just non-RAG queries, so normal queries. RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. And that was from a paper that was published in May 2020. And the simple concept is that if you want something from a LLM, give it the answers before, in a way. So it's a nod to the fact that LLMs are good at organizing information that you give it and interacting with you in a natural language way, and maybe don't have to be seen as a data store, which from my point of view, and I think probably from every security person that has done data segmentation and looks after data protection, it's great because the data doesn't need to be in the LLM. You can just insert it confidentially as you would into any form of application layer. Whether it's getting your bank details and calculating your balance or something like that, that will be done by an application layer. You treat the LLM as an application layer and insert the data into it. It's stateless, so it doesn't save it other than log files, etc., which is pretty standard. And then you get the response and you process the response. So for me, the retrieval augmented generation is definitely strategic. I find it very difficult to see another concept that would be strategic in terms of getting real-time data or private data. into an LLM, so it can be used there. Cool. Yeah, and this is one that I thought is quite relevant. If anybody in security is sort of having a chat with a data scientist, they understandably might be quite focused on, say, resolving hallucinations within the LLM. And as you can see, as you scale the size of a LLM, it does get a lot better. For me, that's hallucinations. I think you want to start using it as a term for the data that's going in and out. And I'm repeating myself a little bit here, but as I said before, you just want your data. That's the main thing. So the point of this slide is just to say that yes, LLMs may no longer hallucinate, but that doesn't actually solve the problem of having valid data processed by an LLM.
So here's where I feel that there is, I think we're creating an interesting situation where, it's a bit like Jarvis and Iron Man, the reference, where Iron Man, uses, basically Tony Stark, right, uses, almost a co-pilot, right, uses somebody to help him. And I feel that what we've done was we developed that, and then we asked, almost Jarvis to sing songs and to not come up with anything that is wrong by itself. And I feel that what'll be interesting to see here is that where is the lines where once you feed in, right, really good data in, and you use the LLMs almost as a business layer that also produces highly curated outputs that also have feedback loops in their environment. Yeah. What is the level of hallucination in there? And the thing that is also interesting that we don't talk about is, if you think about it, our code hallucinates, right? Because bugs are hallucinations, right? Like when people sometimes say, we don't understand how it works, I'm going, dude, we don't understand how your freaking software works, right? And we don't even understand how our frameworks works. Like, and every now and then you have these insane vulnerabilities, and the question should be asking is, how was that even possible? How was it even possible that you have a bit of code in the middle of, this insane, widely used application that does this crazy feature that nobody realized was there, right?
Yeah.
And I really like the idea of using LLMs as a business layer. Do you know what I mean? Where if you think about it, in the past, everything when you build an app was code, right? Every change request, everything was code. And even if you had a new piece of logic, it was it's like we created microservices, but now the microservices, how they all integrate with each other, right? I really like the idea of starting to use prompts, kind of as code, but the prompt becomes what we refine. And then it's about having the small possible or the wider possible prompt that has the best, results with tests in the middle, with almost like you said, the LLM that has the right context or the right amount of, I would say, input and output without making up stuff. So I think that's the interesting curve where I don't need the LLMs to have, for example, no hallucination in and out, right? What I need is for specific scenarios that I feed it, that's where I want it to be really good, right?
Yeah.
And a good example is if you feed, ChatGPT today a bit of code, right? And you say, fix this ping on that code. If you think about it, it doesn't hallucinate. It like almost, you can even argue that the level of hallucination at that level is 0.000001, because the code that it gives you, in the beginning, I would check more than I check now, because the code is literally the same, except for that bit that you've done. And sometimes it even fixes things and going, oh, by the way, I tweaked this for you because you had a little bug there, right? But you think about it, when I feed it really good data, the level of hallucinations that make up stuff is really, really low.
Yeah. Right? My gut says it's approaching zero.
Yeah.
But
Andrew, do you want to chip in that question? Andrew had a really good question here. If you can, or I can ask for you. Oh, okay, fair enough. So Andrew, just ask the question, how does hallucination faithfulness, right, relate to self-verification, right? That thing you were saying, right? And how you measure that metric.
Yeah. So we that was one of the things they covered I wanted with the first iteration of this presentation was just ask the LLM to check itself. And I think that it's valid. And there's a paper on it. One particular one, which is mildly disturbing for me, in a way. It asked a doctor, no, a doctor asked it, sorry, to evaluate or summarize a patient's record. And the patient had low weight and low BMI, or the inverse was depressed and low energy. And it added, I can't quite remember which one it is, but on the LLM evaluation, it added that because the person has low weight and low BMI, they're depressed, or vice versa. Because the patient was depressed, it added that they had low weight and BMI. And then in the paper, they said, can you verify your response? And it said, oh, clearly I got that wrong. In the initial request, there was no mention of the data hallucinated. And it highlighted exactly where it had got it wrong. So yeah. I think self-verification has value. But again, going back to the point that we made a little while ago, I think if you put in the data in, and with the models as they've been developed, I think it is approaching zero. But even as I've said that out loud, I'm going to argue against myself and still think that maybe a little bit of self-verification is still useful.
I think you need, by the way, I absolutely would say that we need to not just have verification in the middle, we need to have change control everywhere in the loop, right? And in an interesting way, think about it, we don't take amazing engineers and put them running AWS by themselves, right? Like, yeah, it's a bit like we take amazing engineers and go, okay, you now build a nice system with CI pipelines where everything is change control and then nobody touches production. So I think some of these should be like that. Like I like this idea where everything that we do, for example, with an LLM is version control, is checked into a Git repo.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely.
You have, and in a way, what we gain in the medium term, I would say the trust that we have is by seeing it over and over and over and over, doing the right thing, and then we go, okay, for these inputs, for that stuff, it's almost the level of trust that we have in there, and then have a situation where when it breaks our trust. And this is where I think is the big difference, right? And Trevor Noah had a great gotcha on this. I mean, if you've seen where he talks about the bias, do you know Trevor Noah, the comedian?
Yeah, right? Yeah, cool. Yeah, I do know who you're talking about then. I was just thinking I only know a comedian.
So yeah, so him, but he's thinking about this, and somebody asked him, what do you think about bias in LLMs, right? Because clearly they have a bias, right? And he says, the good thing of LLMs, and he's like, I'm an optimist, and I share this with him, is that at least we can do something about it, right? So if we find that a particular LLM or a particular prompt has a particular bias because of the inputs and the outputs, we can now go in, understand it, and do something about it. But in society, we can't do that. Like, try changing the bias of a judge. Try changing the bias of individuals in our society that have a lot of preconceived ideas. You might argue with them, you might argue against them, but they are preconceived ideas. And they won't change. It's like, those guys will not freaking change, right? Yeah. So in a weird way, I still feel that we need that human verification. And I think we need almost the real world verification by gaining trust, where we have no decisions, no actions being made that, for example, we don't understand, that we don't validate. And then in a way, the measurement of faithfulness is almost like the measurement of trust is almost like number of events over time that we don't agree with the output, right?
Yeah.
And then you can ask, is that acceptable? Is that not acceptable? Is that less than what the systems designed by pure humans would do, or that system in the middle? But I really like this idea of everything is version controlled, inputs and outputs, so we can go back. It's like telemetry, if you think about it, right? It's like the telemetry of 100%. All the parts. Yeah. So I think that's really cool. Go. Sorry,
and I think to add to that as well, like the we're going to focus. I say we. I think a lot of the world are going to focus on GPTs even,
Yeah.
because of what OpenAI are releasing at the moment. But one of the things that I think is really important to say, and I haven't actually written it in here, but you've touched on something. An LLM is mathematically deterministic when it's set to 0 as a temperature. The only nuance around that I'm aware of, and I've spoken to, on the forum at least, OpenAI employers about this. And the only reason you can't say it's computationally deterministic is because the numbers get so large, the floating point size is so massive that there are some tokens that, when the temperature is 0, might be misinterpreted as being another, but they're always going to be common, or they're, because the size of the floating point is still quite large, it's going to be tokens like the and and that sort of
But
thing.
I'm not sure I 100% agree in ChatGPT. Like I on my experiments, I've set the temperature to 0 and even set the seed. And although it's better with the seed, in bigger responses, you don't get the exact same wording. You don't get the exact same thing. Yeah.
On the playground.
Yeah. Well, play around with it. Well, on the API, I play
Yeah.
around with the temperature, right? It's because there's a degree of
And
variation.
it's always, have you version controlled your prompts?
Yeah, I do. I have to. It's an interesting area that I want to spend a bit more time on it. But I try to create unit tests for it, and I had unit tests that would break, right? So I end up having to ask really good, simple questions in the beginning, at least, right? Which was like, act as a calculator, just give me the answer, or answer in one word, or like, because I'm still on a very basic level of tests. I think there's some frameworks I want to explore, but I was trying to go very deterministic. And I think even at that level, but I think it's okay, right? I don't think at that level is like, I'm not giving it the framework for it to operate. I'm just going, in general, do this, right?
Yeah, exactly. And if you do need to do an addition or something like that, you use a calculator. You don't, if it is a precise calculation that needs to happen, you use a tool that's appropriate to that, and also a lot cheaper and quicker and that sort of thing. Yeah, so I don't think it's a problem as well. I'd love to dig into that, because definitely a year ago I thought I was confident that it is mathematically deterministic. So it'd be interesting to see something.
I'll be surprised, man. Now,
something different.
We don't even understand how the thing works in the top level, right? If you think about it.
You see, this is, so I'm a reductionist, and like when I saw the maths, like you're talking, I don't know if you matrix multiplication, so you've got
I got into that rabbit hole.
2, 4, 3, 6 times by a vector.
Yeah.
For me, because the weights and bias don't change, when you put a number in, you're going to get the same number out the other side, as long as you don't adjust the temperature, because then that's where it is. And
but that works. Okay, but that works, and that's, I think, what you saw that thing where the guys from ChatGPT were saying the big lesson for them was that bigger is better. You know that there's a thing sometimes, like we said, smaller is better. Small, the small thing. The thing that happened, look, this is my understanding, is that there's a level of neural network size that is very deterministic, correct, right? But that's the level that almost doesn't have reasoning. And I think, so look, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that ultimately the language models will operate on layers, right? So you have all sorts of layers that they kind of create from language, context, structure, attention, etc. And the best explanation I've heard so far is that what ChatGPT discovered, in a way, once you had enough layers, enough size of it, and enough content, in a way, the LLMs start to discover other layers above that we still don't fully understand, that describe things like humor, thinking, reasoning, logic. Like there's almost a, because remember that ChatGPT does not have 5 layers; it has tens of thousands, right, of layers, and each one is doing one thing, right? Each of those layers is almost and the layers sometimes are kind of multidimensionals. I don't know if you've seen
definitely.
that. And if you've seen that paper by the Claude guys, where they basically try to group neurons together. Have you seen that research? Where
I haven't. But
dude, that is fucking awesome. So that presentation is where they said they were trying to find cause and effect, right? It's a bit like that. Like, okay, if I tweak this and I tweak that, and they couldn't find correlations when they were looking at the neurons individually, right? Because they were like, it doesn't make sense. These neurons would activate for different reasons. There wasn't a clear cause and effect. But once they start to cluster neurons together to almost create this sort of, artificial layer, right? They found that they start to have very direct correlation between input and output. Oop, did I lost you?
yeah,
Oh, sorry, did I lost you there?
yeah, that's mine.
Oh, okay.
It's back, by the way. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was me. But did you hear that bit? Like, once they add the layers, they had some very interesting correlation between input and output. So they still don't fully understand why is there. So they had, for example, these things where they ask it to if you ask a question in English, respond in English, and a question in Korean, you ask in Korean, a question about maths, you ask in maths, a question about let's say a particular numbers, it comes in numbers, right? So they have that training, right? If you get this input, you produce that output with a bit of change. And then what they found is that those layers, let's say they identify a layer that always gets activated when you're going from numbers to numbers, right? Or geolocation points, location points. So what they found is that if they now overactivate those layers, make them all one, now when you put English, you get numbers, right?
Ah,
When
okay,
you
I'm
put
gonna
Korean, you
fish
get
that
numbers.
out. Yeah.
So they really start to have a connection. And I think that's what I feel is interesting, is that there's layers of understanding and layers of reasoning that the models have that we don't fully understand. Now they still mathematically, eventually we should be able to prove them.
Yeah, so that sort of area, I'd say we don't understand the psychology, or what's another word for your brain, like what the layers mean in
Yes,
terms of
correct.
how it changes the output. I think that is definitely an unknown. And it is knowable. Going back to Trevor Noah's, is it Trevor Noah? Yeah, Trevor Noah's view.
Trevor Noah, yeah.
The whole point of this thing is that you can interrogate the data and do experiments on it and see what the outcome is. So it's, I mean, that's fascinating and going to be really interesting to see what they do. But I go the next layer down and I look at it, and each layer is simply a matrix.
Exactly.
And a vector. And if you're not changing those numbers, the equation never changes. Once you've trained, so the training is about changing the numbers, changing the weights, changing the biases to what they call it a cost function, so that each time it does a derivative of the current weights and biases to get closer to their desired destination. And that's the only time those numbers change. So when you start to put it into inference mode and say, I'm not going to train you anymore, we're just going to run things, to me that means it's deterministic, because you put in the same output and you'll always get the same output, because it will always trigger the same areas. And I haven't seen anything that implies that it wouldn't be at least mathematically deterministic.
Yeah. Well, look, I think that's definitely one of the areas where I think there's still a lot of research flying around, right? And I also think that is, I think more and more, especially as we get closer to the whole sentient evolution, right? I think we need to start measuring that. I think we need to start understanding how much of it is deterministic versus how much is not deterministic. And there might be certain activities that we don't want deterministic because we want specific type of behavior or specific type of things. And by the way, I really like a session I saw by the guy from Figma, where the guys, they're talking about, they use
Figma, did you say so?
Figma, the ones that do, so they were trying to create HTML from the Figma design.
Oh, yes. Right? Yeah.
But there's a really cool presentation. One of the things the guy said that really clicked on me, and that I think is now it really also changed a bit. He said, remember that code, it's still the most efficient way to run something deterministic. right? And I feel that's an interesting concept, because in a weird way, if you think about it, we want a model where we run most of what we do in code. And I actually think that now that we can actually use LLMs to analyze code, code will become even cleaner and more streamlined. And it's almost like what the LLM give us is what code cannot give us, which is a level of almost lateral thinking and kind of innovation or adaptability that the code doesn't have, because code is literally very deterministic, right? And we complicate code to deal with the level of basically a bit of flexibility. But I really like this idea that we always go back to code, because it's always going to be the cheapest, right? And the most efficient way of doing something.
And until you get to the point where the LLMs are very hardware aware, and you can ask them to do something and they will generate assembly code or whatever.
Sure, but it's still code
for that request. And I put that as a counter argument. I didn't quite mean it necessarily as a counter argument, because I wouldn't assert that it is definitely cheaper. But I think
but
there's
that's
something
the
about
thing,
the
right?
scale aspect.
But if you look at that workflow, even in that case, you still would want, for high throughput systems or for things, to take that assembly code and run that. So it's almost like, yes, you can use the LLM to figure out the assembly code, but then run the assembly code in line now, and that's what you run in line, because that's where that's where it becomes really deterministic and also very efficient.
Yeah, great segue to this slide.
Go for it. Cool.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things for me, and I think you definitely understand it, but it's something that I spoke a lot about a year ago as well. It's there's a difference between a model, like a GPT, a transformer-based model, and like an AI system, which is what ChatGPT is. It is an AI system. It's not a model, because a model is stateless. You put your request in and it gives you the text generation off the back of it. It has no knowledge of previous requests or similar. And then also, when you start to look at that and you start to say, okay, let's build a wider system that remembers the conversation that we've had before, which is sort of your basic ChatGPT version or clone. And then you start to say, well, let's ask the GPT to review what's coming in and say, is there a tool that's better for using it? Like we were saying there, that you'd have the GPT to go off and use a calculator to do the mathematics or something like that, where it is cheaper to do that calculation. It's faster and more deterministic around that. So that's what this is an overview of. This is my sort of gut view on what ChatGPT is at the moment. There's probably a few more layers in there. And the semantic router is quite an interesting one. I don't know whether you've heard of that at all, but for me, that's a bit like the WAF, web application firewall. But instead of looking for like known SQL injection on a HTTP request or similar to that, it's looking for intent in the request. So is it just hate speech, or is it asking for something considered dangerous?
Okay, but what's inside that semantic router? Is it another LLM?
A vector. So I think the cheapest way of doing it, you could do it with an LLM, of course, but I think the cheapest way of doing it, and still very efficient, is to use a vector store. So what you do is you just look for similarity and see if, let's say you've got 10 words that you consider your LLM you don't want to talk about. And let's go with politics. You say this is a no politic chat service. So you put in, I don't know, Labour Party, Conservatives, Green Party, and that sort of thing. And then the semantic layer can do a lookup on the query or subparts of the query to the proximity of the words that you consider excluded. And if the proximity is over a certain value, i.e. it's close, then you just say, oh, sorry, this is not on the allowed list for discussion within the ChatGPT.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting use case for the semantic store. And I guess, so this is where I think there's an interesting thing here where you could almost use the LLMs to start building that store or that set of instructions to fine tune it, right? So that,
Yeah.
see, that's a good example of taking the LLMs and bringing it back to code, because your semantic store, the way you're describing, especially with the vector databases, indexes, that's very deterministic, right? It's literally, you know,
Yep.
the definition of deterministic stuff, right? Because the same input generates the same vectors, generates the same outputs, right? At that level.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
as long as the
yeah,
semantic, you know, the embeddings values remain the same, then
yeah.
you'll always get the same values. Yeah. And you touched on a point there that I think is really interesting in terms of updating it. That's another reason why I think you'd use a vector store and not an LLM.
Yeah.
Although I suppose it is getting quite quick to train and update. But let's say, oh, you go, oh, crikey, how could we forget about the monster raving loony party?
Yeah.
You know, it's politics, it's fun, but we don't want to put it in there. It's a $5 job to
Yeah.
to
For
just
the
put
ones,
that name
not
in
in
there.
the UK, that's literally a party that
Oh
applies to
yeah,
local elections. It's a real thing, right? It's a
yeah.
real party in the UK. The design
Yeah.
it's like the hacker mentality, design literally just to take the piss. And they actually get a lot of votes, right?
As a kid, I loved them.
Yeah, but that's a good example of
Yeah.
that. Do you know of anybody who started to use this to try to in a way build that WAF, right? Like, or the LLM
Yeah.
almost firewall, right? Where you have a place where you can start to put signatures, right, of known attacks, because there's value in that, right?
Yeah.
That does reduce the attack surface, right?
Yeah,
Dramatically.
exactly. Yeah, no, and yeah, that's really interesting. Going back to the thing that we said at the start about, you know, what's the future and what's the exploit, the threat vectors and that sort of thing. Yeah, as soon as you know one, you put it in there as if someone types this and it matches its cosine is close enough, then it gets rejected. Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
really cool. Have you tried, you know, like for example, saying I only want valid JSON, or I want valid things like this, or this is the kind of schema that I want. It should probably be able to pick it up, right? If you train it, if you determine what vectors you care about, in a way, anything outside of that, you know, should come up with. It's almost like you can also whitelist this.
Yeah.
I think the logic here is that we need to move to a bit of a allow list, not whitelist. We need to move to an allow list versus a deny list. I like the fact that I can start to say, I only want these kind of vectors. I don't want anything that doesn't match. Instead of saying, these are the vectors that I don't want, what would be much better from a security point of view is to say, here are the vectors that I want for this type of thing, right?
I think, yeah, I see that, and I think it's ultimately achievable. You'd probably need to build that into your product in a way, but then it goes down to that might not actually be as big a job as initially thought, because if you are talking about LLMs being smaller,
Yeah.
or particular, like, you know, you
Use
create like a
cases.
microservice.
Yeah, at least
Which is,
use case driven, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's got a prompt associated to it, which
Yeah.
is version controlled, and then you've got a set of vectors that are the, you know, the OK list or whatever we want to call it, associated to that, and you get that. Yeah, so almost it maybe acts also as well as like a traditional. Well, more a load balancer rather than a firewall, I guess, like a Nginx or something like that, is saying, oh, that's on this vector store. Let's send it. Sorry, that's on this vector similarity. Let's send it over to this server.
So Andrew just says, guessing you could populate, you know, you would populate that based on the LLM itself. Like you avoid inputs that would be against policy. I think absolutely, right? I think, especially if you move into use case driven systems like you have here, right?
Yeah.
Then you could argue that, okay, although we're using a freaking generic LLM that has all these capabilities, we actually only want that capability. So let's make sure that we only allow requests for that capability to reach the LLM, right?
Yeah.
And that also not just reduces the hallucination possibility, it reduces the attack surface, right?
Yeah.
Of the LLMs itself.
Yeah, and it can also be self-aware. I could see how you can make it self-aware to say, if you get a response that isn't within this area,
Yeah.
call a tool that updates the vector store to add whatever the prompt was to it.
Or
So
raise an incident, right? And then we looked into it, right? I
yeah,
think
well,
that
yeah, yeah,
there's something really cool here, man. I think this is, we should explore that pattern, which is kind of, okay, I need a better term for it because it's not a WAF, right? It's almost a laugh, right? A language application firewall, right? Something like that. Or actually, maybe something around foundation models, because I like AWS take on this, where it's a foundation model that you have on top. It's almost a foundation model firewall, right? Or like something
yeah.
that allows you to define the use case, like your semantic router. That almost feels more like a router thing, like you said. That is almost like, where do I go from here, right? Versus a security check.
Yeah, and on that note, there is a product out there that does this. So it's not. I can't take just it is. There is a something out there, and the guy is. He's the guy that was Pinecone, and then he set up his own business. Jason. His videos are good. He always wears a Hawaiian shirt
Cool.
when he's doing his videos. And yeah, so he's got that. So, and I'm pretty sure that's where I took the name from. So I think it's the name of their product
Okay,
on that.
cool.
But yeah, then you could, like, as you say, create a security specific one.
Cool. So Andrew had another comment here. It says, curious, how inference and context is handled between prompts, right? So to correct the context of your request, right? To correct it, right? I'm unclear how this will be implemented, right? Based on the assumptions of how GPT work, right? So how does the inference and the context that, especially between prompts, right? And I guess what we, and just Andrew, maybe correct me if I'm wrong here, but when context, in a way, it's a bigger prompt, right? I think that's because
Yeah,
the in a way the system has no memory. It's almost like the TCP, right? There's nothing there. Although in here
it's
you do have,
completely
although
stateless.
here you have a bit of memory element in there, right? But the prompt is what's provided, right? So between
Yeah,
prompts is this you keep adding more and more things to it, right?
yeah, and in the sort of original versions of LangChain and that sort of thing, it was purely a I mean, you'd store it as an object in Python, but it would literally be inserted as text to the prompt. So if
Yeah.
I asked, "Oh, what are my interests?" It would come back saying, "I don't know what my interests are," and then I said, "My interests are rugby, maths, etc., etc." And then I asked, "What are my interests again?" The prompt would be that conversation. So it would start from the top, me saying, "What are my interests?" The LLM saying, "I don't know." Me
Yeah.
telling it my interests, so you've got to the right here. I've put something called memory, which I think is. So this to me is an area that I think is massively vulnerable to a certain extent, because this is where you start to store personal data, um, and the LLM is going to choose which parts of the memory now it does it. Some memory is done by vector stores, so instead of it being a full prompt and the context, they will say, here's an entity memory store. So part of the LLM will analyze what entities you've been discussing. It could be my house, the name of my cat, name of my kids, or something like that. And so they will be stored as memories in there. So it says entity, children, their name, and then that will be stored. Maybe it's a dictionary, maybe it's a vector store, or something like that, and reference later. So if I come back to the conversation, and I do believe, based on a video I've seen this week, OpenAI are about to release something very similar to that, where it will understand your projects that you're doing. It'll understand what goals you want across all of your chats. So to me, that means there's a separate memory store that will be inserted into the context. And it's as simple as that. The LLM isn't going to know, except for this AI system inserting it. And that's, for me, I think, where it's really really important, to differentiate between an AI system and an AI model, because an AI model has no knowledge
Yeah.
beyond what's put in.
Well, the AI model in here, what you're saying is just the LLM part. It's almost like a foundation model.
Yeah, exactly. And then the additional things, vector stores, tools, memory,
Yeah.
are things that add information to the context when it's needed. So
Yeah.
I've got hey, you're right, I'm on it's being recorded as well.
Yeah, but we just need a little paper
Okay.
for me. Sorry to disturb.
They need some paper from the printer next to me.
That's all right.
Where's the printing though?
Yeah.
Do you want the wheel or just like?
Yeah, there we go.
There we go. Thank you, Debbie.
It's not working from home if you don't if you don't get a guest.
And the dogs and everything else coming through.
Yeah, the cats are the funniest often
And the
because they just
cats,
sit
yeah.
on people's heads, won't they?
Cool. All right.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about wrong direction. Sorry, guys. Right. So just before that, I thought this is like for me what was the old back in the old days of 2023. When LLMs were first big, it would talk a lot about the language you use. That's with the presentation we were doing. Be direct with it. I put an example there where by setting the right context, the LLM has agreed that white and black are the same color. So I think the key thing there for me is that by setting the right context, you can, you direct the LLM to think how you want it to think. Think being the sort of human projection of what it's doing. But I don't.
But the thing about being polite, right? And I do that. I say good morning. I feel it's just that's who you are, right? It's kind of like you shouldn't be rude, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's like the thing, and I think there's also a kind of a theme about this. It's like that behavior. Like if why would you be rude, or why would you behave in a much more maybe not you way, just because you're having a conversation, right? It's kind of like I feel that you want to be you, and maybe if you're not a very nice person, if you do never say that, maybe don't do that, right? But I feel that and I have some friends who tell to the kids and going, look, this is not you now. You have to almost respect, right? Because it's kind of an interesting. It's always funny, like, it goes, well, just in case, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I completely agree with what you're saying as well, because one of the things that I treat it as is an extension of my thoughts. So I'm like, I've got this thought in my head in the moment, and I've got this sort of one that I feel is similar. I put it in ChatGPT to see if it makes connections or what connections it makes. So there's like a cycle of thoughts going backwards and forwards. And it's always good to be polite to yourself as well. I nearly put a slide in here called the KIS slide, called Keep It Simple. And part of my punchline on that is no one's stupid, but you don't have to be. You can still get into the details. So I prefer to say keep it simple, KIS, rather than KISS. It's just a little thing for me.
There's also the thing of what I really like about also this thing, and it's like a safe room to ask really in a way. I know people always think, oh, it's a stupid question. No, it's not. There's no such thing as a stupid question, because if you have the question, it's a valid question, right? It's just you happen not to have. And I remember when I was using it to learn, I would ask him questions. Sometimes I think, oh, maybe I should know that. But I'm like, no, the power here is I'm able to go very deep and ask basic questions. But they're basic because I haven't looked at it for a while, or I haven't, looked at it since freaking university, right? Or I never really understood that concept very well. So I like that you can go very deep in your learning workflows, right? And then go from there.
And that's like when I did maths, one of the biggest things, and I try and teach it to my daughters as well, is and also within the teams of like, I'll give you credit if you show you're working.
Yeah.
Because you can come back to it and reference it, and that's influenced the way that I work a lot. Sometimes I don't remember I don't remember the answers, but I remember how to do them. And
Exactly, and that's what you measure. That's what in a way learning is, right? Like you learn when you have a path, right? And then the
yeah,
details sometimes are less important. Is how you solve that path, right?
yeah.
Just a quick question
And
here.
instead of walking that path myself, often I'm like, oh, I'm just going to ask ChatGPT to do it. I know I could do it. It's going to take me 10 minutes, but
Yeah.
I've asked it and it's done it in one.
And you do learn. I think people say, "Oh, you delegate that." No, I feel like I'm more done with Google than I am with ChatGPT because now
Oh,
I'm
definitely.
learning also the things where
Yeah.
Google is like is like the numbers. A cool question for you. It says, fascinating session, Matthew. Is there a case where LLM hallucination actually enhance the output quality or creativity? So it's not about 100% accuracy, but also ability to think a bit outside the box, which could be a hidden advantage.
That's I mean, the creativity, definitely. I think, I guess, without or not being putting too precise a definition on hallucination, I think using the LLMs in a way that isn't fact based is still perfectly valid. I've used it to write little Zen koans and stuff like that. I love that.
Yeah.
Limericks is one of my favourite things to do sometimes as well, and just to write silly things. And it is quite a creative process, and you bounce things off. And it's certainly a lot better
Yeah.
at poetry and limericks than I am. Which
But look, for example, like
is that hallucination?
yeah, so I use it for coding a lot, right? And for example, I will do things like, hey, I have this function or this class, I want to do this. Give me 10 names for it. And then you do variations. And I'll
Yeah,
go, oh, okay,
exactly.
that one
Yeah,
is really cool,
yeah,
right? So I think a lot of this is about when you're driving, it's just because I think it's an insane advantage, right? Because sometimes you do want it to hallucinate, you do want it to go off piste. The question is, I think it's more of you understanding when it does it and when it doesn't,
yeah,
right? That's
yeah,
the key
exactly.
part, right?
And yeah, going back to I said I couldn't think of a right definition of hallucination to sort of feel like I was given an answer, and I think now can, and that is a case that you know whether the response is factual or creative, and that to me is probably the definition of
That's
best
a really so,
definition.
so imagine you get that in your answer, right? Imagine and I think that would be really cool. I think it'd be really cool if in the answers that you got, and this is some of the stuff I've been playing around with, the pet project I'm doing, right? About board members and all that stuff, because hallucination is a big thing. But I also feel that I like the idea of when you present an output, you give a trust level, like you just described, where you say, it's almost like
Yeah,
where on the hallucination or make commenter is
yeah,
this, right? Is this something like, for example, the first time that you answer a question in a certain topic, you can say, well, I have less confidence than, oh, by the way, this question has been asked by 20 other persons and the answer is always like this, and everybody said it's a good answer, right? And in a way, you kind of want to play that game of going, when do you want more or less creativity, when you want more or
yeah.
less hallucinations, right? And I think as long as the consumer can see it, I think it's going to be
Yeah.
very useful, right? The problem is
That's
when
transparency on it is the key
when
thing.
they don't understand it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, quite. And it's one of the things a friend who's got similar interests and I were talking about that. And we just said, oh, give us your confidence rating between 1 and 0.
Yeah.
So every response, it was given a confidence rating. And, that's unscientific. It's anecdotal what we were doing, but it shows that it's capable. And if you start to build it into these faithfulness libraries that are being built, I don't see why that couldn't be a value that is with every response or something like that.
Yeah, I think confidence level is a really good. You can see why they want hallucination, not confidence, right? Because confidence is a word that is already very loaded.
Yeah. Yeah, hallucination's
That
really
would
out
have been a
there,
better
isn't it?
word.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it would be a
still like
better word.
discombobulated.
I think I get combobulated just saying the word discombobulated, man.
Yeah, I think I like saying it as well. That's one of the reasons why I would like to go for it. We wouldn't talk about it much, I don't
Cool.
think. Has that question been
Yeah, got it.
answered?
All right, cool,
I'm
man.
just trying to read. Yeah, cool.
I think we did.
I think we've sort of done that slide a little bit there. Oh no, the thing that I wanted to say there is one of the key things is let the LLM choose the tool it uses, and then that becomes a continuous feedback. actually think because you can do that without retraining the LLM as well, because you can. So I'm going to just take a step back. The controls for an LLM to choose which tool it uses is the first things are the prompt and the tool definition. And I'll show you a screen in a minute. But so you can change those, and you can change the wording. You know, is the tool clearly defined? Does it just say Google, or is it search Google, or search Google News, or is it search Google News API, or you know? And
is that what you're tying
definition
with, for example, ChatGPT APIs, where you can get it to then call functions?
It's exactly that's the API version of what you can do in the GPTs when you create one as well, and you can do it in LangChain as well. And yeah, you want to be clear with the description of the tool when you register it with the LLM of what it does, or the function I think is called in the API, isn't it?
Yeah, but in a way, it's almost, I feel, if you go back to that slide just had before, I think that choosing the tool, and I totally agree, which I feel that's a bit on that semantic router, right? Because I think I like the word router there, which is like, where do we go next, right? Like which tool, almost which LLM we go, or which tool we go to, for example, get the data, and that might be that mix of vector stores, but also an LLM itself that says, okay, for this question, you want to go to that web service, or you want to go to that LLM, or you want to, you know, I don't know, just go to the full LLM because we couldn't figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. Like a default case on a case statement. Yeah, and I think Microsoft are going to be the people to watch for this. I think they're, you know, Sebastian B, as I'm going to call him now. I think he's moving towards this, where you've got like the lowest possible sized LLM that is capable of high level reasoning, and that would act as the router. It has no knowledge within it. You just say, hey, look, these are the tools that you're aware of. Here's the query, which tool should I use? And it would know that exactly as you've said. One of the things that I think you'll like as well, I'm going to skip that slide for the moment and just talk about this. So one of the techniques that, what's the name of the chap? Oh, yeah, I'm jumping around a bit now. Yeah, so Cobus Grayling in December introduced this concept of step back prompt engineering. I think you'll really love it. It's the one that I've chosen to use at the moment because it actually fits with me psychologically as well. Like if you've got a team member that needs to achieve a task and they're going, someone from the business has asked me to do X, Y, and Z, and I'm a bit stuck. You know, it's the first thing you do is say, okay, let's take a step back. You know, why are they asking for it? You know, have they actually given you all the information? Is it only half a request? Do you need to ask for more information, or does someone else need to give you the information as well? So there's, you know, the block diagrams. I didn't want to display them there because I've yet to fully understand them. And I possibly might not ever, really, to be honest with you. I get the concept, so I'm happy with that. So what you can do, going back to the bit you were speaking about here, is have a router that doesn't just match the prompt, says enrich the prompt. So I'm jumping about a bit now because I wanted to. Yeah, look. So this is my example of the prompt. The first thing I did is just say list my interests. And, you know, in hindsight, I think I would have liked to have been more vague to test it. But in my mind, it's got to go, oh, what's interest? Take a step back. It's got to understand what's in the prompt. So I can show you the instructions in a little bit. But by telling the LLM to take the step back, it's going to go, do I need more information? And then go, okay, so I've got these tools that can give me that information. And on the API is a user's me endpoint, and the LLM can call that endpoint to get my interests.
Yeah. But this
Um,
is what, in a way, ChatGPT functions do, right? Because you tell it
Yeah.
and I agree that this is an insane game changer, right? Because it allows you to determine on a prompt, you go and start to get more data to collect, but you already use that intelligence. And I actually think that reduces the attack surface. Because if you think about it, what you're now describing is all the main actions that you can do.
Yeah. It's not just a general endpoint anymore. And going back to the bits we were talking about, the semantic router to understand what's important. Yeah, you can start to make it specific, I guess. I can't think of an analogy at the moment or a similar use case, but yeah, you can say only open this port rather than have all
these
of
are the
them
only
open.
ports available, right? Instead of, let's say you have one that controls a bit of AWS, but you're going, yeah, but for that, it's almost like you only get this IAM key and you only can call these endpoints. So it doesn't matter what prompt you get, you're not going to be able to, in a way,
Bloody hell,
exploit the
and
system.
you can do it by user base as well. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be the input, as in the prompt. You can say, oh, this person's allowed to ask this type of questions, but this person isn't. And that's a thing that I've got about having identity with the requests, which is I'd love to know if there's anybody that's got a similar interest, because I need some help. But
I'm definitely there,
yeah, the key things for me, the reason why I use GPT at the moment, as in the UI, is it's really I've got more time to think about how I'm organizing the data, because I think knowledge graphs are going to be really significant in the coming months. And
I agree.
and
What are
the
you using
difference
to store the data? What's your knowledge mass database? What do you tend to
So
put the data?
purely Postgres structured data at the moment. I haven't quite
JSON.
got to the point. Sorry?
So JSON, right?
No, well, mixture. So some of it's normal form. I'm a 70s kid, so I still like normal form structured SQL.
Fair enough.
I can appreciate JSON and unstructured data, but in my mind, there's a place for all of it, and even more so now. So one of the things I'm collecting is like threat data, and it's there's a threat actor, so I'll put it in a normal table. But then other things, I use JSON fields within that as well, and that's the reason I like Postgres, is because you can query as a SQL, you can query unstructured data within JSON fields. And they've got the PG vector extension now, which means you'll be able to do similarity searches and cosine matches and that sort of thing.
Cool.
So,
Look, I agree with you, right? I usually I like JSON as a storage mechanism, because I like to serialize stuff to S3, but then you load it up in a kind of either Elastic or more traditional SQL databases, right? That allows you to then super quick access the data, right? Cool.
I think if you are talking large volumes of data as well, like if it's a seam or something like that, you would use JSON. But the bit I'm looking at is a smaller section as well, so the data's not as much.
Cool.
And BigQuery was I found brilliant before as well. That's a good reason to use GCP.
Cool.
And because the thing for me that's going to be interesting is where we define discrete and continuous data. And by that, I do mean whether it's structured or unstructured, but a JSON form or a SQL database is structured, and then putting something in a vector is continuous. So then you've got this interesting query or interesting challenge, like Tony Searle on LinkedIn is really worth following. He's working at UBS and he's doing a lot of work on knowledge graphs, and he publishes some really insightful and easy to comprehend pictures. Ultimately, there's quite a lot of pictures, and when he talks about continuous data, it's like if you're doing a query about the Friends episode, TV show, where does, at what point do you go from talking about Joey to Rachel? And there isn't, in a continuous vector graph, there is no delineation between that. They're all in that munge together. But if it was in a structured database, Joe would be in one table. It'd have properties like his surname, his character, his actor, and that sort of thing. So that's I think going to be quite interesting to know how we do it. And that's going back to the bit at the start where I said, if you're doing RAG at the moment, don't worry about vector stores, because there is, well, it depends what you're doing. But for me, if I want to know about a threat actor, I only want to know about that threat actor.
Yeah.
And I can use a relationship. I create a network of threat actors that work together.
But that's that thing, what I think the LLMs gave us is a layer of reasoning that wasn't there, right, before. But there's for 90% sometimes of our use cases, our existing tech is more than capable, right? It's, again,
exactly.
It's still going to be more efficient. A good SQL hash-based database, or that you have deployed in the cloud with tons of data, is still going to be way faster than anything else you can build. What you don't have is the ability to start interpret results. And that's what I mean, that business logic that in the past was all code, we can now start to add that. So it's almost like let each tool do what it does really, really well. So we don't overcomplicate, for example, our data layer or our APIs. We're trying to do logic that was never good to do anyway, because that was always your interpretation of what that logic was supposed to be at that moment in time. And as soon as you want to do something a bit different, you're screwed, because you're going to have to modify everything, right? Where if it's just a prompt, we were talking about, we could even have one unique per user, right?
Yeah, exactly. It becomes very, very bespoke and very flexible.
Cool.
Yeah.
So Gradio is cool, by the way. The other one is what's the other Streamlit, something like that.
Streamlit, yes. I was torn between it. The reason why I go for Gradio is the OAuth interface is slightly easier to use, but it does need a little bit of love because it only works with Hugging Face at the moment.
So I had that problem, and one for my project I'm doing, I've actually open sourced a whole bunch of stuff on the OWASP security bot, and one of the ones you have in there is I had that exact problem. So I rewrote the UI using just web components and using only normal HTTP requests, so that there's no WebSockets, which is a pain, and it's fully serverless. So, dude, if you want, it's open source. It's really cool.
I need to check that out. You need to check that out.
So it's a full, nice ChatGPT interface, right? That is fully blown serverless, running on top of Fast API and what's it called, Flask, and it's freaking cool, man. It's serverless, no state, and it took me a little while just to get the tweaks in it, but it's now using web components, so it's nice and fast, nice isolated, right? So, because I had that exact problem, right? It's not as mature as Gradio, but it's already open source, so it's a cool project.
I'll have a look. I'll definitely have a look.
I'll put the link in the
chat. At the moment, I'm GTP. I always get that wrong. Sorry, GPT. Oh, is there another question there?
No, don't think so. Nope.
No, cool. So this is the case study. Excuse me. This is the bit that it's all been leading up to a certain extent, about where I've applied the theory, which is a lot of it's anecdotal, of course, theory, to try and create something. So, this is an implementation of that model there, where the specific tools are these API endpoints that you can see at the bottom. The key things, like in green, is where give the GPT a persona. Excuse me. No, that hasn't sorted that out. I've been talking a lot. I'm not used to talking this much.
I'm sorry, but this is a really cool session, man, by the way.
I don't know. I've realized I don't know what the time is. But I'm enjoying it, so it doesn't matter. the orange is the bit where you say don't hallucinate. How do you stop hallucinations? You tell it not to hallucinate. It sort of works actually,
Yeah.
especially when you're adding the data in. So that's what the next bit, the blue, is saying. Use the available API, part of which you can see below, to answer questions about threat actors and their actions. And then I put in, when there's a conflict, just in case there is some internal usage that it does conflict, I want the data that I'm giving it to be the priority. And then, yeah, use the note to say use step back prompting. So just to say, hey, if the query coming in is not precise, it's not, it's a bit vague, look back and say, what's the bigger picture? And then use the tools to get the relevant information. And then again, at the end, just reinforce, don't generate your own information. I've found in my times I've needed to do that sometimes, remind it, repeat on that sort of thing.
Yeah, but can you see that what's interesting is that is now becoming code, right? That's
absolutely.
that bit you described there.
Yeah.
But also the beauty of this is that as you evolve and you improve those prompts, the cost, now you have two things, right? You have the cost of developing the APIs, which almost become very good at very, almost like you said, discrete and deterministic inputs and outputs, right? The same input for user me retrieve, the same input to CTIA groups list to produce the same output. And then you start to have the customized bit where you could also start to use user preferences. You can start to use, industry sectors. You can start to say, by the way, this person, only wants to receive stuff in this area, or wants to receive in bullet points, or wants to have humor, right?
That's exactly what, yeah. So I've got a section called interests in the user profile, which is a JSON field, to enable that exact flexibility that you've just said. Because I haven't got to the point where you can update it from the chat, but I'd like to be able to say, hey, here's my interests, and then ChatGPT create the JSON, and then it gets inserted in. But the interests here I'm pretty boring. I only like 2 threat actors. That's my sole interest in this experiment. But I handcrafted that for to see that it works. And then I think the second prompt is the prompt where I got very excited when I asked it to tell me about it, because what's happened there is it's called the API, and it's called these various endpoints to say, okay, let me get your interests, let me search for the group's information, let me search for posts from those groups. So it's, for me, simply saying, can you tell me about the actions? It has done those 4 API calls to collate the information and then present it to me in a way. And going back to your point, yeah, definitely, I could say I want it presented in NIST, or aligned to NIST, or ISO 27001 or something like that.
So when you say alpha production version of what are you building? Is there
what did I say?
When you say you have an alpha production version, what is
there? Yeah, no, I don't yet. I'm aiming to have one for.
No, but of what? Are you doing like an open source project? Is it a tool you're building, a service, a product?
So at the moment, it's a project that I'm spending quite a lot of time on. I'm really focused. I'm a little bit on. I think it should be an open source project, but I'm also not quite at a point where I would want someone else to see it yet, because it's in between proof of concept and what's the word I'm looking for? Collaborative.
So my recommendation is just do it sooner rather than later. It doesn't matter. You won't get a lot of contributions in the beginning, but it's going to solve lots and lots of little problems, but also will allow others to help a bit, or to start to be more involved sooner rather than later. Like, for example, if you had open source, I could have taken a look right now, right? And it doesn't matter if it's, the whole definition of production, it's always very fuzzy, right? And sometimes people think, oh, I might commercialize it, but I think with a lot of these things, the commercialization should never be the core of the tech, should be on the services that you provide
Agreed.
on top, right?
Yeah.
So in a way, you want to start sharing sooner rather than later, because I think there's a lot of cool opportunities that come out of it. Also, it just opens up a lot of, I find it also cleans up a lot of some of the stuff you do. And that's why I do. Like, I tend to, like, when I have an idea, I just put it there, you know, so it also makes it easy for me to use from other places, right? So it just, you know, I would say, so put it up there sooner rather than later, right? And then then come to the
Yeah.
opportunity to come and do a session on it.
I think to be honest, I guess what I'm saying is I haven't made that decision yet, but my intention at the start was never really to build something that would be thoroughly commercialized as a, you know, unique service, more as a proof of concept around what could be done.
Yeah, cool.
And
And that's the way to learn, right?
yeah, exactly. And that's the key thing. And the last thing I've got to do, which is what this is alluding to, is when I say production, that is a very, very grandiose term for not running on my computer.
Fair enough. But look, some of the stuff I've been doing might help you, right? Because I've already done a lot of the pipelines, a lot of the things in there, right? So you can just reuse most of it if you want.
Yeah, cool. I'll have a look.
Yeah.
One thing, just for the video, and if anybody ever, you know, gets to this point, which I think they could actually, it's been a very exciting and interesting conversation. So if it touches on people, as Matt Damon would have said to the problems posed by LLMs, AI systems, and as he did when he was on Mars, we've got to science the shit out of this, and people have been doing that. So there's some links in the presentation. I don't know what you'd like to do, Dennis, in terms of sharing it, but these are 3 resources that are very, very, very useful for getting more. So I've talked about what have I talked about? Step back, sorry. Prompt technique. We spoke about self-verification earlier as well. And this prompt techniques site has all of the key ones in there, so that's really useful. Ragas is good, and you'll probably like that, Dennis. It's a framework for evaluating the responses and that sort of thing. And yeah, so that's the last bit for me. I probably should call it a day as well.
No, I mean, so I'm sorry, man. I think I kept driving.
It's 4:08.
I know, man. I think we kind of went on a little bit.
Yeah.
But this was been a really, really cool session, man. I think we, you know, it's one of those, you know, sessions that I think a lot of people should, you know, kind of read, because this is like some of the forefront of the research, right? Where we are.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
it's really good. And
Cool.
cool. Well, look, let's continue. Let's talk more. Let's do more sessions. Let's collaborate. I think we're definitely very aligned, and I think you're onto
Yeah.
something really cool, man. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, and I saw the Slack channel, so I'll pop on that a bit later as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks,
All right,
guys.
everybody. See you.